Welcome to this exploration of one of the most unsettling cases ever documented in the history of Pikeville, Kentucky. Before we start, I encourage you to share in the comments where you are tuning in from and the exact time you are hearing this narration. We are curious to know which locations and what hours of the day or night these recorded accounts manage to reach. The unpaved trail leading toward Chloe Creek proved especially hazardous during the winter of 181. Travelers making their way toward Pikeville would frequently find themselves looking for refuge before undertaking the final descent into the valley. Situated on a ridge overlooking what the locals called Hungry Hollow, the Mountain Pass Inn stood as a solitary haven for exhausted visitors. Documents from the Pike County Register indicate that between 1885 and 1892, the establishment was operated by Elijah and Silas Blackwood, two brothers who had taken over the property after the previous owner, a widow named Margaret Tiller, reportedly moved to live with family in Virginia. County deed records dated June 17, 1885, reveal that the brothers bought the land for a price well below market value, prompting questions that would not be answered for decades. What makes this case especially disturbing is not just the disappearances later connected to the inn, but rather the meticulous record-keeping found in 1963, when highway workers expanding the road uncovered a sealed root cellar beneath what had once been the inn's kitchen. As reported in the Pike County Herald edition from April 17, 1963, the workers came across a set of leather-bound ledgers that contained guest registrations spanning 7 years. The ledgers, now kept on microfilm at the Kentucky Historical Society archives, disclosed a troubling pattern. For every 4 guests who signed the register, roughly 1 had their name crossed out with a peculiar notation: "Account settled in full." Further inquiry revealed that these notations consistently corresponded with travelers who were never seen again after their stay at the Mountain Pass Inn. The Blackwood brothers were well-regarded members of the Pikeville community. Elijah the elder, at 42, served as a deacon at the First Baptist Church and was recognized for his generous contributions to local causes. Church financial records from 1887 to 1891 reveal that he gave more to the building fund than any other church member. His standing was such that when the town council discussed imposing stricter rules on businesses outside town limits in 1888, Elijah's establishment was explicitly exempted, as noted in the minutes from the council meeting of March 12 that year. Silas, 5 years younger, was quieter but equally admired for his skills as a butcher who provided meat to much of Pike County. The quality of his goods was frequently praised in the social columns of the Eastern Kentucky News, with one entry from September 1889 noting that Mr. S. Blackwood's smoked ham took top honors at the Harvest Festival, with judges commenting on its unique flavor. Their inn was strategically positioned at the junction where travelers from Virginia, Tennessee, and other areas of Kentucky would pass through en route to, or from the coal mining operations that were just beginning to reshape the region. The growth of the coal industry in eastern Kentucky had dramatically increased traffic through the formerly isolated mountain passes. According to a state economic survey from 1890, commercial travel through Pike County had grown by 67% over the preceding 5 years, creating perfect conditions for an establishment like the Mountain Pass Inn to prosper, and for its owners to choose victims from a constant flow of unfamiliar faces. The Mountain Pass Inn was a 2-story building constructed from local timber, offering 6 rooms for rent upstairs and a dining room that, according to 1887 ads in the Eastern Kentucky News, became well known for its hearty stews and the distinctive taste of its roasted meats. Architectural records recovered during the 1963 investigation indicate the building was originally constructed around 1870. with major renovations completed soon after the Blackwoods took ownership. These renovations, according to building permits filed with the county clerk, involved reinforcing the cellar floors and walls. Modifications that investigators would later determine were meant to create a soundproof space beneath the kitchen. The building stood roughly 4 miles east of Pikeville proper, isolated enough that the nearest neighbors, the Coleman family, lived more than a mile down the ridge. This isolation would later prove crucial in understanding how the brothers' activities could continue unnoticed for so long. The inn was situated where the old wilderness road curved sharply around a steep outcropping, forcing travelers to slow down precisely at the point where the establishment came into view. In winter, this section of road became especially dangerous, as the combination of ice, steep incline, and poor visibility often left travelers with little choice but to seek lodging at the inn. What particularly baffled investigators in 1963 was the discovery of a small brass bell among the items in the root cellar. As detailed in the subsequent report filed by Sheriff Raymond Hatfield. Relation to the famous feuding family unclear. The bell matched the description of one that had belonged to Edward Calloway. A coal company representative from Philadelphia reported missing in October 1889. The bell bore an inscription, to EC from PCC. May prosperity follow the sound of your call. PCC was later identified as the Philadelphia Coal Consortium, Calloway's employer, which had sent inquiries to Pikeville after he failed to return from his trip to evaluate potential mining sites in eastern Kentucky. At the time, the investigation concluded he had likely been robbed while traveling through the Cumberland Gap. His name appears in the Blackwood ledger with the familiar notation, "Account settled in full." Next to this entry, unlike others, was a small drawing that appeared to be a bell. In the winter of 1891, life at the Mountain Pass Inn followed a predictable pattern. Silas would rise before dawn to light the fires and begin preparing breakfast for any overnight guests. According to a letter from a traveling textile salesman named Howard Jennings to his wife in Cincinnati, preserved in the Cincinnati Historical Society collection, the younger brother performs his duties with mechanical precision, speaking only when addressed directly, yet his eyes miss nothing. Jennings stayed at the inn twice, in December 1890 and again in February 1891, and survived both visits, perhaps because he traveled with a business partner on both occasions. By all accounts preserved in local memory, and the few surviving letters from former guests, the brothers kept an immaculate establishment. The floors were swept daily, the linens changed regularly, an unusual luxury for such a remote location. Robert McPhersonson, a mining engineer who stayed at the inn in January 1891, wrote to a colleague that the cleanliness of the establishment stands in stark contrast to the muddy, primitive conditions one expects in these mountain outposts. The elder Blackwood explained that attention to detail is what separates civilization from barbarism. McPhersonson's correspondence takes on a dark irony in light of later discoveries. The true nature of the civilization the Blackwoods had established. Elijah managed the business affairs, keeping meticulous records and corresponding with suppliers from as far away as Lexington. His penmanship, as shown in the recovered ledgers, was flawless. Each entry made with precise, flowing script that revealed his education at a seminary in Virginia before he returned to Kentucky in the early 1880s. Several letters to suppliers found during the 1963 excavation depict a man obsessed with details, requesting specific cuts of meat to supplement their own supply, particular spices from New Orleans, and certain varieties of root vegetables that he claimed were essential to his brother's recipes. What few people knew was that beneath this respectable exterior, the brothers maintained another set of books. Found alongside the guest register in 1963 was a small notebook containing calculations of weights, costs, and profits that initially puzzled investigators until Dr. Harold Feinstein of the University of Kentucky analyzed them in his unpublished 1964 study of the case. The notebook seemed to track inventory, but the classifications were cryptic, with entries like grade A male approx 180 lubies, followed by calculations of usable portions and waste. Dr. Feinstein's analysis, which was suppressed at the request of several prominent Pike County families, but later leaked to researchers in 1967, concluded that the notebook represented a meticulous accounting of human remains processed for consumption and commercial use. Martha Coleman, whose family lived nearest to the inn, would later tell her granddaughter in an oral history recorded for the Pike County Historical Society in 1952 that she had always felt uneasy about the establishment. My father forbade us children from going near the place unless accompanied by him or my older brothers, she recalled. He never said why, but I remember how he would become quiet whenever Mother suggested stopping there for Sunday dinner. There was something in his eyes, like he knew something, but couldn't bring himself to speak it. In the same recording, Martha recalled that, on one occasion in the summer of 1890, her father returned from a delivery to the inn visibly shaken. When pressed by his wife, he reportedly said only, "I saw something in the smokehouse that I wish to God I hadn't." He refused to elaborate, and the family never again visited the inn. The Coleman farm supplied eggs and some vegetables to the inn, and Martha's father, John Coleman, would make deliveries every Thursday. According to Martha, he always insisted on leaving the goods at the front door rather than bringing them to the kitchen as most vendors did. When his wife pressed him about this peculiarity, he reportedly answered only that, "The less I see of that kitchen, the better I sleep at night." County records show that John Coleman sold his farm in 1892, shortly after the Blackwood brothers disappeared, and moved his family to Ohio, a move that some researchers have interpreted as an attempt to distance himself from whatever knowledge he may have possessed about the brothers' activities. The ridge where the Mountain Pass Inn stood experiences dense fog throughout much of the year, often shrouding the building by mid-afternoon. Weather records from the Pikeville courthouse indicate that between October and March, visibility on the ridge could drop to less than 10 feet on as many as 18 days each month. Travelers caught in this weather had little choice but to seek shelter, as attempting to navigate the treacherous descent to Pikeville in such conditions would be foolhardy at best and fatal at worst. The Blackwood brothers seem to have developed an uncanny ability to predict these weather patterns, often preparing extra rooms just before a bank of fog would roll in, bringing with it stranded travelers grateful for any refuge. One such traveler was Carolyn Meeks, a schoolteacher journeying to take up a position in Pikeville. According to her correspondence with her sister in Cincinnati, preserved in the Meeks family collection at the Ohio Historical Society, she arrived at the inn on September 3, 1890. "The place has a strange atmosphere," she wrote. "The older brother is excessively polite, almost theatrical in his courtesy, while the younger barely speaks, but watches with such intensity that I find myself unable to meet his gaze. I shall be glad to reach Pikeville tomorrow and put this place behind me." In a subsequent letter dated September 10th, she mentioned, "The strangest thing about that mountain inn was the cellar door in the kitchen floor. It was secured with not one, but 3 heavy padlocks. When I inquired about it, merely to make conversation during an uncomfortable silence at dinner, the older brother smiled in a way that did not reach his eyes and said, 'We mountain folk have our treasures, Miss Meeks, and the prudent man secures what he values most. I did not sleep well that night. Meeks would go on to teach at the Pikeville School for Girls for 3 years before returning to Ohio. Her survival may have been due to what she described in another letter as the fortuitous arrival of a large family just before dinner was served. The registry confirms that on that date, the Miller family of 6 checked in, possibly altering whatever plans the brothers might have had for their solitary female guest. A notation in the second ledger, however, indicates that Elijah had initially marked her as a potential account to be settled, before crossing it out and writing, "Unsuitable profession, too visible," beside her name. In early March of 1891, an unusual event disrupted the routine at the Mountain Pass Inn, according to a brief notice in the Eastern Kentucky News, dated March 12, 1891. A man named Thomas Barrett arrived in Pikeville claiming his brother William had disappeared while traveling through the area the previous autumn. What made this case different was that Thomas carried with him a distinctive watch that he said belonged to William, a gold timepiece with an inscription commemorating 25 years of service to the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. Thomas explained that the watch had been sent to him anonymously, postmarked from Pikeville, with no accompanying note or explanation. The newspaper account quotes Barrett as saying, "My brother would never have parted with this willingly. Something has happened to him, and I mean to discover what." Thomas Barrett's arrival in Pikeville set in motion a chain of events that would eventually lead to the first suspicions about the Blackwood brothers. According to the recollections of Deputy Marshal Franklin Pierce, recorded in the Pike County Sheriff's Office Annual Report of 1891, Barrett insisted on visiting every establishment his brother might have stayed at along the route from Virginia to Pikeville. The journey took him more than a week, checking registries at every inn and tavern along the way. When he arrived at the Mountain Pass Inn, he reportedly became agitated upon seeing a similar gold watch chain hanging from Elijah Blackwood's vest pocket. When questioned about the watch, Elijah produced a timepiece that, while similar to the one described by Barrett, bore no inscription. He explained that it had been a gift from his father many years earlier. According to Pierce's report, Elijah appeared uncommonly composed during the questioning, maintaining that he had never met William Barrett. The registry for the dates in question showed no entry for Barrett, though later examination of the recovered ledgers would reveal that several pages had been carefully removed, their absence noticeable only because of Elijah's otherwise meticulous record-keeping. Barrett was not satisfied with this explanation, but without proof, Marshal Pierce could not pursue the matter further. The incident, however, planted the first seed of suspicion regarding the Blackwood brothers. Less than a week after Barrett's visit, a spring storm washed out part of the road leading to the inn, and during repairs, a road worker named Jesse Hatfield, a distant cousin of the feuding family, discovered a pile of discarded clothing in a ravine approximately half a mile from the inn. Among the items was a boot that Thomas Barrett later identified as similar to those his brother wore. According to Hatfield's statement to Marshal Pierce, included in the 1891 annual report, the clothing appeared to have been deliberately cut away, as if removed from a body with a sharp knife, rather than simply discarded. However, no conclusive evidence connected the clothing to William Barrett or to the Blackwood brothers, and the matter was officially classified as inconclusive in the Marshal's report. The official explanation offered by local authorities for the occasional disappearances along the mountain roads was predictable and convenient. Accidents, wild animal attacks, or simply travelers continuing their journeys without informing anyone. Marshall Pierce's annual report for 1890 noted that the treacherous nature of mountain passes, combined with the increasing traffic of strangers, unfamiliar with local hazards in outreach fortunes that often undiscovered, the remote and often lawless nature of the Appalachian region in the late 19th century made such explanations plausible, and most cases were not investigated thoroughly. Elijah Blackwood was particularly adept at reinforcing these explanations. According to an account from Reverend Isaiah Thompson of the First Baptist Church, recorded in church minutes from April 1891, Elijah often led prayers for the souls of those lost to the perils of mountain travel, and even proposed establishing a small cemetery near the inn for unfortunate travelers on their journeys far from home and loved ones. The church would indicate that the proposal was received favorably, though never implemented due to more pressing financial concerns. Reverend Thompson noted that Elijah seemed unusually insistent about the matter, offering to donate the land and a substantial sum for maintenance of the cemetery. The community's willingness to accept these explanations stemmed partly from economic necessity. The Mountain Pass Inn was one of the few establishments providing accommodation for the growing number of businessmen coming to invest in the region's coal resources. According to Pike County tax records from 1890, the inn generated substantial revenue that benefited the local economy through purchases of supplies and Elijah's generous donations to community projects. A petition circulated in 1890 to improve the road leading to the inn gathered over 50 signatures from local merchants who cited the benefits of increased traffic to the area's economy. Additionally, the Blackwood name carried weight in Pike County. County census records from 1870 show that the brothers' father, Nathaniel Blackwood, had been a respected judge before his death in 1882, and their grandfather had been among the earliest settlers in the region. This heritage provided the brothers with a degree of insulation from suspicion that strangers would not have enjoyed. As one anonymous source told the Pike County Herald during the 1963 investigation, in those days, the word of a Blackwood was taken as gospel. If Elijah said a man had continued on his journey, no one would think to question it. Dr. Rebecca Collins, in her 1967 study, Frontier Justice and Community Silence, which was completed but never published due to her sudden death that same year, suggested that the community's reluctance to question the Blackwood brothers represents a form of collective denial common in isolated communities dependent on key individuals for economic stability. Collins, who interviewed several elderly Pike County residents who remembered the brothers, noted that there was a palpable discomfort when the subject was raised, as if breaking the silence would implicate the entire community in whatever transpired at the Mountain Pass Inn. By the summer of 1891, the initial suspicions raised by Thomas Barrett's visit had largely subsided. Life at the Mountain Pass Inn returned to its regular rhythm, though some locals began to take note of patterns they had previously overlooked. Martha Coleman recalled that her father became increasingly reluctant to make deliveries to the inn, eventually sending her older brother in his place. When asked why, he reportedly said only that some things are better left unquestioned. Similarly, the local postmaster, Hiram Watson, noted in his personal diary, discovered among his effects after his death in 1924, that the Blackwood brothers receive an unusual number of inquiries regarding persons who have apparently vanished while traveling through our region. I find myself wondering if there might be some connection, though prudence suggests I keep such thoughts to myself. The most significant shift came in the behavior of Silas Blackwood. According to accounts from various sources, including entries in the journal of Dr. Samuel Wilson, the only physician in Pikeville at that time, Silas began to exhibit signs of what Wilson described as nervous agitation. He was observed pacing along the ridge behind the inn late at night, and on several occasions was seen digging in various locations on the property. Wilson, who treated Silas for insomnia in July 1891, noted that the younger Blackwood appeared haunted by some unspoken dread. In his medical journal, Wilson recorded prescribing laudanum for Silas's condition and observed that the patient exhibits the classic signs of a man burdened by severe moral conflict. When questioned about the source of his distress, he becomes evasive, referring only to obligations to family that he finds increasingly difficult to bear. A ledger entry from August 1891 shows a significant drop in the number of counts settled in full compared to previous months, suggesting that Silas's deteriorating mental state may have begun to interfere with the brothers' usual activities. According to Dr. Feinstein's analysis, the brothers typically processed 1 to 2 victims per month during peak travel seasons, but August 1891 shows no such entries. Instead, there is a notation in Elijah's handwriting that reads simply, "S becoming unreliable, considering alternatives." As summer faded into autumn, the Mountain Pass Inn saw a decrease in travelers. The ledger entries from September 1891 show fewer guests than the same period in previous years. Whether this was due to spreading rumors or simply changing travel patterns is unclear from the available records. What is clear is that the relationship between the brothers began to show signs of strain. On September 8th, Dr. Wilson was summoned to the inn to treat Silas for a laceration to his right hand. In his journal, Wilson noted that the wound appears to be defensive in nature, such as one might receive warding off an attack with a blade. When questioned, both brothers claimed it resulted from an accident while butchering, though the angle and depth suggest otherwise. A letter from Elijah to a supplier in Lexington, discovered among business records in the 1963 excavation, contains a cryptic reference to this tension. "My brother's constitution seems increasingly ill, suited to our enterprise. His weakness threatens all we have built. I find myself considering measures I would once have deemed unthinkable." The letter, dated September 15th, 1891, goes on to cancel a standing order for special seasonings and requests, instead a substantial quantity of arsenic, ostensibly for controlling vermin that have become problematic in the root cellar. The change in the brothers' relationship did not go unnoticed in the small community. Sarah Jenkins, who delivered milk to the inn twice weekly, told her son, who later recounted the story to Pike County historian Walter Hensley in 1949, that the air in that place had turned sour between them. Where they once moved like one person with two bodies, they now watched each other like strangers. Something had broken between them, and I feared what might come of it. Jenkins also reported that on her last delivery in late September, she observed that the younger brother had taken to sleeping in the stable rather than the main house. When I asked if something was amiss, he simply said that his brother's snoring had become intolerable, but there was fear in his eyes when he glanced toward the house. A receipt from Harlan's General Store in Pikeville, dated September 29th, 1891, shows that Silas purchased a revolver and ammunition, an unusual acquisition for a man who, according to local accounts, had previously expressed distaste for firearms. The store owner, Jacob Harland, later told investigators that Silas had appeared agitated and glanced repeatedly over his shoulder, as if expecting to be followed. When asked about the purchase, Silas reportedly claimed it was for protection against wild animals that had been troubling the livestock. As October arrived with its early frosts, the brothers continued their operations, though with a noticeable increase in precautions. According to the ledger, They began turning away single travelers, particularly men traveling alone, precisely the type that had previously made up the majority of their accounts settled in full notations. Instead, they focused on families and larger groups passing through the area. An entry from October 3rd shows that they refused accommodation to a solitary traveler despite having vacant rooms, with a notation, S objected strenuously. Potential conflict avoided by claiming full occupancy. The annual report of Pikeville's coal production for 1891 indicates a significant increase in mining operations that autumn, bringing more traffic through the mountain passes and potentially more witnesses to any unusual activities at the inn. This change in circumstances may have forced the brothers to adapt their practices, creating additional strain in their already deteriorating relationship. A letter from the Eastern Kentucky Mining Consortium to town officials dated October 10, 1891 mentions plans to establish regular stagecoach service along the route passing the Mountain Pass Inn, which would have dramatically increased visibility and scrutiny of the establishment. In what would become a pivotal moment in the case, on October 17, 1891, a hunting party from Pikeville led by Magistrate William Rutherford stopped at the inn seeking shelter from an early snowstorm. According to Rutherford's account preserved in a letter to his brother in Louisville dated October 23, 1891, the hunters arrived unannounced due to the sudden change in weather. Upon their arrival, they found the front door unlocked, but no one present in the main building. A fire burned in the hearth of the common room, and a pot of stew simmered in the kitchen, suggesting that the brothers had stepped out only momentarily. Rutherford described hearing sounds of violent dispute coming from the outbuilding that served as the smokehouse. When the hunting party approached, the brothers emerged, Silas with blood on his apron, not unusual for a butcher, but Rutherford noted that Elijah's hands were similarly stained. The brothers appeared startled and, according to Rutherford, exhibited the demeanor of men interrupted in some secret enterprise rather than legitimate business. Elijah quickly recovered his composure and welcomed the hunting party, explaining that they had been processing a deer brought in by a local hunter earlier that day. Rutherford observed, however, that there was no sign of a deer carcass in the smokehouse when one of his companions peered inside. The hunting party stayed the night, but Rutherford recorded that none of the men slept soundly. There was movement throughout the night. He wrote, heavy objects being dragged, and at one point what sounded like digging beneath the floorboards of the kitchen. In the morning, the brothers served breakfast as usual, though Rutherford observed that Silas's hands trembled so violently he could barely pour the coffee. More disturbing was his observation that the younger brother bore a fresh bruise upon his jaw and a series of small burns on his right forearm that appeared deliberate in their application. After the hunting party's departure, rumors began to circulate in Pikeville. Rutherford, as a magistrate, felt compelled to mention his concerns to Marshal Pierce, but no official investigation was launched. Instead, according to town council minutes from November 1891, it was decided that inquiries shall be made discreetly, so as not to damage the reputation of respected businessmen without substantial cause. This decision reflected the continued influence of the Blackwood name and the economic importance of the inn to the community. Even as suspicions grew, what happened in the following weeks has been pieced together from various sources, including entries in the brothers' ledger, correspondence found in the 1963 excavation, and accounts from locals collected years later. The picture that emerges suggests a rapid unraveling of both the brothers' relationship and their careful facade. A notation in the ledger dated November 1, 1891, in what appears to be Silas's handwriting, reads, he becomes more reckless. Says the cellar is nearly full, but refuses to relocate any of it. The smell will give us away when the spring thaw comes. This cryptic entry is followed by several pages where the neat columns of Elijah's usual record-keeping give way to increasingly erratic entries, suggesting a breakdown in the methodical operation of the inn. On November 10, 1891, a cattle trader named Michael Flynn stopped at the inn. His name appears in the register, but without the usual neat handwriting of Elijah. Instead, it seems to have been added later, possibly by Silas, with no corresponding account settled. Notation: Flynn was never seen again after this date, but unlike previous disappearances, his absence was immediately noted. According to an article in the Eastern Kentucky News, dated November 18, 1891, Flynn had been expected to deliver cattle to a buyer in Pikeville, but never arrived. The buyer, concerned about the substantial sum he had advanced to Flynn, reported the matter to Marshal Pierce. A search party was organized, and on November 20th, they arrived at the Mountain Pass Inn to question the brothers. According to Marshal Pierce's report, they found only Silas present, who claimed his brother had traveled to Lexington on business. When asked about Flynn, Silas said the trader had stayed one night before continuing toward Pikeville the next morning. Silas appeared nervous during the questioning, and when asked if the search party might inspect the premises, he reportedly became agitated, insisting that Elijah would not approve of strangers rummaging through the inn in his absence. The search party found nothing suspicious at the inn during their cursory examination, but two members reported feeling uneasy about Silas's demeanor. One later told Pierce that the younger Blackwood had the look of a man standing on a gallows, waiting for the trap door to open beneath him. They departed without further incident, but Pierce noted in his report that he intended to return when Elijah was present to conduct a more thorough inquiry. The true nature of what occurred between the brothers would not become clear until many years later, when a letter written by Silas was discovered during the 1963 excavation, addressed to a cousin in North Carolina, but apparently never sent. The letter described how the brothers' enterprise had begun to unravel. Elijah has become reckless in his selections and excessive in his appetites. What began as necessity in lean times has transformed into something I cannot name without condemning my own soul. The cellar walls cannot contain the weight of our deeds, and I fear judgment approaches. Last night I dreamed our mother stood at the foot of my bed, her eyes hollow and accusing. When I awoke, I found Elijah watching me from the doorway, his expression unreadable in the darkness. He speaks now of expanding our operation, of opening a second establishment nearer to the mining camps. I cannot follow him further down this path, yet I see no way to extricate myself from what we have built together. The bonds of blood have become chains, and I find myself contemplating desperate measures to break them. The letter, dated November 25, 1891, suggests that Flynn's disappearance may have been a breaking point for Silas. A subsequent entry in the ledger in Elijah's handwriting indicates that he returned from Lexington on November 27th and was displeased to learn of the marshal's visit. He notes, S becoming a liability. His weakness could destroy everything. Must accelerate alternative arrangements. This is the last coherent entry in the ledger before the final chaotic pages. On December 3, 1891, Elijah Blackwood returned to Pikeville, but not to the inn. He appeared at Marshal Pierce's office, disheveled and agitated. According to Pierce's official report, Elijah claimed his brother had taken leave of his senses and might pose a danger to himself or others. He requested assistance in having Silas committed to the state asylum in Lexington. When questioned about the specifics of his brother's condition, Elijah described increasingly erratic behavior, claiming that Silas had begun to suffer from delusions, believing that the dead were speaking to him from beneath the floorboards. Elijah suggested that the strain of running the inn in such an isolated location had gradually undermined his brother's mental stability. Pierce, who had been suspicious of the brothers since the Flynn investigation, saw an opportunity to examine the inn more thoroughly. He agreed to accompany Elijah back to the property, bringing 2 deputies with him for support. According to his report, Elijah seemed relieved by this decision, though in retrospect, Pierce would conclude that the elder Blackwood's true motivation was to establish an alibi for whatever he had planned for his brother. When Pierce and the 2 deputies accompanied Elijah back to the inn the next day, they found the building dark and seemingly abandoned. A search of the premises revealed no sign of Silas, but in the kitchen they discovered what Pierce described only as evidence of violent struggle and considerable bloodshed. The padlocked cellar door had been broken open, and a trail of blood led from the kitchen to the rear of the property, where it disappeared at the edge of the forest. A more thorough search was organized, including the surrounding woods, but Silas Blackwood was never found. In the absence of a body, no murder charge could be brought against Elijah, who maintained that his brother had likely fled out of fear of being committed to the asylum. Elijah suggested that Silas had possibly injured himself during his mental episode, and then wandered into the forest in a state of confusion. He expressed concern for his brother's welfare and offered to fund an expanded search, a gesture that some viewed as genuine, while others interpreted it as an attempt to direct attention away from the inn itself. Elijah was detained briefly on suspicion, but released due to lack of evidence. The official report concluded that Silas had either met with foul play at the hands of unknown persons or had indeed fled the area. Marshal Pierce, however, remained unconvinced. In a personal letter to the county judge dated December 10, 1891, discovered among court records in 1966, he wrote, "I believe something unspeakable has been occurring at the Mountain Pass Inn, and that Elijah Blackwood is responsible for his brother's disappearance. However, without a body or witnesses, I cannot justify further action. The blood in the kitchen has been cleaned away, and Blackwood has an explanation for everything. I remain troubled by the whole affair, but see no clear path to resolution." Less than a week after his release, Elijah Blackwood sold the Mountain Pass Inn to a businessman from Lexington and reportedly left the state. The sale, recorded in county deed books on December 15, 1891, shows a transaction significantly below market value, suggesting Elijah's haste to distance himself from the property. His destination was recorded as St. Louis, but no records confirm his arrival or residence there. Like his brother, Elijah Blackwood effectively vanished from historical record after December 1891. Rumors persisted in Pike County for years afterward. Some claimed to have seen Elijah in New Orleans or San Francisco. Others insisted that both brothers had been spotted together in Mexico, a particularly persistent story, recorded by local historian Walter Hensley in his 1949 collection, Folk Tales of Eastern Kentucky, held that Silas had turned the tables on his brother, killing Elijah and assuming his identity before fleeing. None of these accounts were ever verified, and the fate of the Blackwood brothers remained one of Pike County's enduring mysteries. The Mountain Pass Inn remained in operation under new management until 1904, when a fire destroyed the main building. According to the Pike County Herald's account of the incident, dated July 30, 1904, the fire began in the kitchen and spread rapidly through the wooden structure. The new owner, James Harrington, escaped with minor injuries, but reported that the blaze seemed to originate from beneath the floorboards. as if the very foundations of the place had ignited. This curious detail went unremarked upon at the time, but would take on new significance decades later. The property was abandoned after the fire, and over time, the ruins were reclaimed by the forest. The events that had transpired there might have been forgotten entirely, if not for the highway expansion project of 1963 that uncovered the sealed root cellar. According to the project foreman, Samuel Tanner, the discovery was made when a bulldozer operator noticed that his machine had broken through what appeared to be a man-made structure beneath the forest floor. Initial investigation revealed a chamber with walls of mortared stone, sealed with a concrete cap that had been poured sometime after the original construction. The discoveries made during that excavation painted a disturbing picture of what had occurred at the inn. In addition to the ledgers and correspondence, workers found human remains. According to the forensic report filed by Dr. Lawrence Cranston of the Kentucky State Medical Examiner's Office, dated July 15, 1963, the cellar contained bones from at least 7 individuals, all showing signs of systematic processing consistent with butchery techniques. The report notes that the remains had been carefully sorted and stored, with similar bones grouped together. Most disturbing was the discovery of a collection of small personal effects, rings, watches, buttons, and other items that had presumably belonged to the victims, stored in glass jars labeled with dates corresponding to entries in the ledger. Further analysis of the kitchen implements found in the cellar revealed traces of human tissue, leading to the inescapable conclusion that the Blackwood brothers had not only murdered selected guests, but had also processed their remains for consumption. The brothers' smokehouse techniques, praised in local accounts, had apparently been applied to human flesh, which was then served to unsuspecting travelers and possibly sold to businesses in Pikeville. More disturbingly, the distinctive flavor of the inn's famous stews and roasted meats noted in contemporary accounts suggested that other travelers and possibly even locals had unknowingly participated in these acts of cannibalism. Dr. Cranston's report included a detailed analysis of tool marks on the recovered bones, indicating that the processor possessed considerable skill in butchery techniques, systematically removing meat from bone in a manner consistent with professional training. This observation aligns with Silas Blackwood's reputation as a skilled butcher. The report also noted that the remains showed evidence of having been preserved using smoking and curing methods similar to those employed for pork and beef in the late 19th century. Among the most unsettling items recovered from the cellar was a leather-bound journal, apparently belonging to Elijah Blackwood. Unlike the business ledgers, this journal contained personal reflections that provided disturbing insights into the brothers' motivations. In an entry dated August 1886, Elijah wrote, "I have discovered that necessity may be transformed into virtue through proper application of will and technique. What began as desperate measures during the winter of '85 has evolved into something approaching art. We waste nothing, honor everything, and in doing so elevate ourselves above the common run of men who lack the courage to recognize the truth of our condition." The case attracted brief national attention in 1963, with articles appearing in several major newspapers. The Louisville Courier-Journal ran a front-page story on July 20, 1963, with the headline, "Horror Unearthed in Pike County, Cannibal Inn's Grim Secrets Revealed." The article quoted Sheriff Hatfield as saying, "This is the most disturbing case I've encountered in 27 years of law enforcement. The methodical nature of these crimes, and the fact that they continued undetected for years, raises troubling questions about what else might lie buried in our county's history." However, many Pike County residents expressed skepticism about the findings, preferring to view the story as sensationalized reporting, rather than accept that such horrors had occurred in their community. A letter to the editor published in the Pike County Herald on July 25, 1963, signed by several prominent local families, questioned the lurid interpretations being placed on the discoveries and suggested that the remains might have other, more innocent explanations. Within months, interest waned, and by the time Dr. Collins attempted her study in 1967, many locals refused to discuss the matter. Dr. Collins, whose research was cut short by her sudden death, officially ruled a heart attack, though some researchers have questioned this conclusion, documented the community's reluctance to confront its history. In notes for her unfinished study, she wrote, "Pike County exhibits a collective amnesia regarding the Blackwood brothers that borders on pathological. When questioned, even those old enough to remember the events firsthand claim ignorance or change the subject. This silence speaks volumes about the community's complicity, not necessarily in the crimes themselves, but in the failure to acknowledge signs that might have prevented them." In 1968, a fire at the Pike County Courthouse damaged many of the records related to the case, including Marshall Pierce's original reports. The timing of the fire, coming just as Dr. Collins's research was gaining attention in academic circles, led some to speculate about whether it might have been deliberately set to obscure the historical record. An investigation by the state fire marshal concluded that the blaze resulted from faulty electrical wiring. But questions persisted, particularly given that the records room was the primary area damaged while surrounding offices remained largely intact. The remains discovered in the cellar were eventually reinterred in an unmarked grave in the Pikeville Cemetery, and the case file was officially closed. The microfilmed ledgers and other documents were archived at the Kentucky Historical Society, but remained largely forgotten until 2009, when historian Dr. Martin Holloway attempted to access them for research, only to discover that the relevant microfilm reels had been misplaced during a renovation of the archives in 1983. This convenient disappearance of critical evidence has fueled speculation that influential Pike County families may have worked to suppress the full history of the Blackwood brothers. Today, all that remains of the Mountain Pass Inn is a small clearing in the forest beside what is now Route 119, approximately 4 miles east of Pikeville. No marker indicates what once stood there or the horrors that transpired within its walls. The site is unmarked on official maps and guidebooks, and if you were to ask at the Pikeville Visitors Center about the location of the former inn, you would likely be met with polite confusion or a change of subject. Local residents rarely mention the Blackwood brothers, and when asked about the old inn, most claim no knowledge of its history. Yet the story persists in whispers and fragmented accounts, a dark chapter in Pike County's history that resists being completely forgotten. Occasionally, travelers along Route 119 report an unusual phenomenon in the early morning fog. Some claim to glimpse the outline of a 2-story building where only forest stands, and the faint smell of cooking meat drifting across the road where the Mountain Pass Inn once welcomed guests who checked in, but never checked out. In 1966, archaeologist Dr. Emily Harrison visited the site as part of a broader study of historical structures in eastern Kentucky. In her field notes archived at the University of Kentucky, she recorded finding fragments of what appeared to be a dinner bell buried beneath the remnants of the inn's foundation. The bell, when partially reconstructed, matched the description of the one belonging to Edward Calloway, whose disappearance in 1889 had gone largely uninvestigated. Harrison also documented discovering a small cavity beneath what had once been the dining room floor, containing a collection of teeth. Some animal, others distinctly human, arranged in a circular pattern that she described as suggesting ritual significance beyond mere disposal. "What haunts me," Harrison wrote in her private journal, which was donated to the university after her death in 1994, is not just the evidence of atrocities committed, but the community's willingness to look the other way. The silence of Pike County regarding the Blackwood brothers speaks volumes about our capacity for collective denial when confronted with horrors too terrible to acknowledge. I find myself wondering how many guests at the Mountain Pass Inn commented on the distinctive flavor of the stew while dining on their fellow travelers, and how many suspected the truth but chose not to speak of it. That silence continues to echo across the ridges and hollows of Pike County, a reminder that sometimes the most disturbing aspects of history are not what is recorded, but what is deliberately forgotten. The Blackwood brothers vanished from Pike County in December 1891, but the questions their case raises about community complicity, selective memory, and the capacity for evil hiding behind respectable facades remain as relevant today as they were then. As one elderly resident told Dr. Collins shortly before her death, "Some stories aren't meant to be told, Doctor. Some secrets belong to the mountain, and the mountain keeps what it takes." The site of the Mountain Pass Inn has never been developed since the 1963 excavation. Highway planners rerouted the expansion to avoid the area, citing engineering considerations, though some workers reported refusing to return to the site after the initial discoveries. Today, the forest has reclaimed the clearing, and nothing remains to indicate what once stood there, except perhaps an unnatural depression in the earth where the cellar was partially excavated and then resealed by order of the Pike County judge. As for the ultimate fate of the Blackwood brothers, some questions may never be answered. Did Silas finally rebel against his brother's increasingly reckless appetites? Did Elijah eliminate his weakening partner and escape to build a new life elsewhere? Or is there truth to the local legend that neither brother ever left Pike County, that they remain there still, buried in the anonymous soil of the mountains where they conducted their terrible business? The answers, like so many aspects of this case, have disappeared into the fog that still shrouds the ridge where the Mountain Pass Inn once stood, leaving us with only fragments and whispers of one of the most disturbing chapters in Kentucky's hidden history.